Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us at the 2020 Annual General Meeting. I am pleased to announce that we have met quorum. At this time, it can confirm that we have 41 signed proxies in hand and 77 participants online. We can now formally begin the program.
Member companies who employ more than 100,000 people in our region. We're delighted that so many of you have joined us this afternoon for our 2020 Annual General Meeting. We're here today for several very important reasons. First and foremost, we'll be conducting the essential business of the Edmonton Chamber. Then we'll have a unique opportunity to gain national insights and perspectives from our guest speaker, the Honorable Perrin Beatty, President and CEO of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. But most importantly, we're here to celebrate each of you, our valued members. We're a member-driven organization, and without your continued support and involvement and passion, well, we simply couldn't fulfill our mandate. So thank you so much for joining us today. Now, as this is our very first virtual AGM, I'll begin today by sharing a few tips that will hopefully make your participation in the meeting more interactive, maybe more fun. Everyone is automatically muted. This is a default position for all attendees. Only our presenters have live microphones, which is good because they'll be doing the actual talking today. But I can assure you there are many ways for you to participate and make your voice heard. During the formal portion of the meeting, you'll use the polling feature to cast your vote and help us complete formal motions. We're actually going to test this out right now. We put together a fun poll to make sure everything is working. So a window should pop up on your screen shortly, and when it does, you have 10 seconds to choose yes or no. So please vote now. Really? Well, there you go. There is no way that pineapple will ever find itself on my pizza. Okay, now we're all clear on how to participate in a vote. I'll next ask you to find the Q&A feature. It's located in the bottom toolbar. After each presenter speaks, you'll have an opportunity to ask questions, and that's where the Q&A feature will come in handy. Now, with that bit of housekeeping out of the way, I'd like to begin the formal portion of our program. Allow me to first introduce our board of directors. Now, these are volunteers who give so generously of their time and their energy to guide our chamber. Brian Deneve is our board chair and the Senior Vice President of Finance and Chief Financial Officer at Capital Power. Alan McDonald is our vice chair and the Senior Vice President of National Client Development at Global Public Affairs. Craig Thorkelson is Secretary Treasurer of our board and the head of tax with PCL Constructors. Dawn Harsh is our past board chair. She's the president and CEO of Exquisite Care Senior Living and Care at Home. Haydar Al-Dahan is the principal electrical mechanical engineer at Design Works Engineering. Nathan Carter is the vice president of operations audit at ATCO. Sandy Jacobson is the vice president of Richardson Executive Search. Scott McEachern is the vice president of pipeline control at Enbridge Pipelines. Anne-Marie Petrov is the president and CEO of the Francis Winspear Center for Music. Dennis Schmidt is the principal of Altura Legal Advisory. Jeffrey Sundquist is CEO of EDC Environmental Group of Companies. And Dr. Janelle Trenchak-Sake is the president and CEO of Parker, Ford, and McKay Specialty Opticians. Thank you all so much, board, for your support, your expertise, and your tireless contributions. I'd now like to invite our board chair, Brian Deneve, to take us through the formal proceedings of our 2020 Annual General Meeting. Over to you, Brian.
Thank you, Janet, and welcome everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, at the Edmonton Chamber of Commerce, we're committed to using our powerful voice to positively influence decisions made by every order of government. I'd like to take a moment to highlight some of our advocacy achievements from 2019. After years of lengthy delays, we appear to be making progress towards increasing our pipeline capacity. Construction resumed on the Trans Mountain Pipeline Expansion Project, and the Canadian portion of the Enbridge Line 3 project was also completed. While many challenges remain, these important milestones bring us closer to having new pipelines to Tidewater, and they reflect the tireless advocacy efforts of the Chamber and our partners in the Canadian Global Cities Council. In June 2019, the Alberta government introduced the Job Creation Tax Cut, making Alberta the province with the lowest corporate income tax rate in Canada. Along with the government's focused efforts to reduce red tape, lowering the corporate tax rate will help job creators grow their businesses and attract much needed investment to Alberta. We've been strong advocates for the elimination of interprovincial trade barriers, and throughout 2019, Alberta's Premier has shown strong leadership in tearing down these barriers. Alberta is now the province with the fewest exceptions under the Canada Free Trade Agreement, and we're hopeful that other provinces will follow suit. 2019 was a very busy year for our advocacy and outreach team, with a provincial election in the spring and federal election in the fall. We provided all provincial parties with a platform of our priorities, and I'm pleased to report that the Government of Alberta has already enacted 2/3 of our recommendations. We partnered with the Calgary Chamber to develop a joint federal election platform that reflects the needs of businesses in both our great cities. So much has changed since last October, but we will continue to work with our counterparts at the Calgary Chamber to ensure the needs of businesses are front and center with federal decision makers throughout the COVID-19 crisis and beyond, as businesses face the challenges that await them after the pandemic. Finally, in December 2019, the Edmonton Chamber undertook an advocacy campaign ahead of this year's city budget planning discussions. Accompanied by members of the business community, we appeared before City Council and urged them to hold the line on property tax increases. These efforts resulted in the lowest tax increase in recent years, and we're building on these results to push for the kind of long-term transformative change that will secure a more competitive future for Edmonton businesses. These are just a few of the achievements that defined 2019 for the Edmonton Chamber. I encourage you to visit our website to read our 2019 member report and learn more about our commitment to supporting our vibrant business community. In 2020, we'll continue to deliver on our mission to provide an exceptional experience for our members and help to bolster Edmonton's business environment. We'll support and enhance the Edmonton business community by advocating for conditions that keep your business competitive, delivering educational experiences that help you thrive, and connecting you to the right people. Chambers like us play an important role in the civic life of Edmonton. It's an honor and privilege to serve as chair on the board of such a dynamic, vibrant, and essential organization. I would like to thank everyone who volunteers time to support the Chamber's advocacy work and member experience. None of these things would be possible without your commitment. The 2019 AGM minutes are attached as part of your meeting package. I presume that you've had a chance to review them, so I'll ask for a motion to approve the 2019 minutes as circulated. Okay, still waiting.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, to interrupt. I see that Dennis Schmidt has moved the motion.
Okay, I'll ask for someone to second this motion.
I see that Faye Elford has seconded the motion.
In a few seconds, a poll will appear on your screen, and you'll have 10 seconds to vote on the motion. All those in favor? The polling is closed. Motion carried. Thank you. I'll now ask Robert Eason, audit partner with KPMG, to present the 2019 audited financial statements. Robin has kindly offered to take questions following their presentation, so I encourage you to think about what you may want to ask.
Great, thank you, Brian. So as was mentioned, I'm Robin Eason. I'm a partner with KPMG, and KPMG is pleased to serve as the Chamber's auditors. So thank you for having me today. I was going to just briefly walk you through the financial statements, which I believe are in the package that you have in front of you. So the short story is that the 2019 audit went very well. We had a very thorough planning process. The team at the Chamber was well prepared for us. We executed our fieldwork as planned. And at the conclusion of that fieldwork, we had several discussions both with the management team, with the audit committee, and then with the board, with the financial statements ultimately being approved on March 17th. We have issued a clean opinion, so the same form as we've offered in the past, no change other than the dates. So if I can flip you forward, I will take you to the statement of financial position. So this summarizes the Chamber's assets, liabilities, and equity position as at the end of December 2019. If we take sort of a summary view, looking first at the subtotal or the grand total of the assets, you will see that overall the asset balance has declined this year, which is by design. So in the prior year, the Chamber had just under $14 million worth of assets. In the current year, that's gone down to about 11.5. I say by design because there was an intentional plan to repay the long-term debt this year. So the investments in cash were then used to settle that debt, bringing down the overall asset balance. If we move down to the second half of the page, the liabilities and equity position are summarized here. So as I've already mentioned, you will see that the long-term debt has been repaid. So in the prior year, it was about 2.5 million. That's been drawn down to 0. In terms of the equity position of the Chamber, so the bottom category on this same page, you'll see the net assets are broken down into 3 main components and overall have increased year over year. So from about 6.7 million to 7.2. And the reason for that we'll see on the next page, but overall it was a successful year for the Chamber. So that summarizes the balance sheet as at the end of the year. I'll turn one more page and walk you quickly through the statement of operations. So on this page, we can see a comparison of the 2019 results to 2018. For those of you who've been participating in this for a few years, you might be happy to see that we now have a 12-month comparative. In the past, there was a change in the year end, so it's taken 2 years to work that through the system, but we now have apples to apples comparison when we look on the income statement. So if we focus again just on the totals, we can see total revenue for this year was 5.2 million as compared to last year, which was about 4.9 or just shy of 5. So some changes overall in a variety of the line items, but the main contributor to that increase is the revenue that has been generated through the Trade Accelerator program. So we can see a bit of an increase there. Looking down on the expenditure side, again, looking at the subtotals, we can see that expenditures on an overall basis held flat year over year. So from 4.6 million, still at 4.6, meaning that that increase in revenue has really fallen straight to the bottom line. And we're seeing overall for the year about 615,000 in excess of revenue over expenses. You might see that the interest on long-term debt is relatively consistent year over year and might wonder why, given that I said that the long-term debt had been repaid. It was actually repaid in November, so there was still some interest being incurred throughout the year. I'll take you to the next page, which is the statement of changes in net assets. This summarizes the main categories of equity and the transactions that have occurred in all of these categories. What I wanted to point out was the ending balances. So at the end of the year, there's no balance remaining in the unrestricted fund. There has been a slight decrease in the internally restricted fund and an increase in the invested in capital assets. So that stands to reason given that dollars were taken from the unrestricted and used to fund the repayment of the long-term debt, meaning that there have been more dollars invested in the Chamber's capital. Page 4 is the statement of cash flows. This statement then summarizes where cash was generated and where cash was consumed. So again, looking at the subtotals, we can see positive cash from operations at about $616,000. Your financing activities consumed cash to the tune of $2.5 million, given the repayment of the debt. And the investing activities were cash positive at $1.4 million, given that investments were liquidated to fund the repayment of that debt. So on an overall basis, cash has decreased just over $500,000 down to slightly over $1 million. So that takes us to the notes. I won't go through those in detail, given that I assume those have been read, but as was mentioned at the beginning, I'm very happy to take any questions. So I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Chair.
So at this time, anyone with questions, you can use the Q&A feature and put those forth to Robin. All right, last call for any questions. Okay, since there are no more questions, Mr. Chair, we'll turn the podium back to you.
Thank you, Robin. On behalf of the Board of Directors and our entire team at the Edmonton Chamber, I would like to thank KPMG for the excellent service you provided to the Chamber over the past 2 years. I would ask for a motion to approve the 2019 audited financial statements as circulated.
Mr. Chair, Don Harsh has moved the motion.
I'd ask for a seconder for this motion.
I have Elan McDonald seconding the motion.
A poll will now appear on your screen and you'll have 10 seconds to vote on the motion. All those in favor? Polling is closed. Motion carried. Thank you. At this time, I would call for a motion to approve KPMG as the auditors for 2020.
I have Craig Thorkelson moving the motion.
I'll ask for someone to second the motion.
I have Jonathan Leskew seconding the motion.
Okay, once again, we'll have a poll appear on the screen and you'll have 10 seconds to vote. All those in favor? Polling is closed. Motion carried. Thank you. This concludes the formal proceedings of the AGM. I will now turn the meeting over to Janet to take us through the rest of the program.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd now like to introduce our guest speaker, Perrin Beattie. Perrin is the President and CEO of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, Canada's largest and most representative national business association. Before joining the Canadian Chamber in August of 2007, Perrin served as President and CEO at Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters. In 1972, Mr. Beattie was elected to the House of Commons. He served for 21 years in Parliament, holding 7 different ministerial portfolios, including Treasury Board, National Revenue, Defense, and National Health and Welfare. He's received honorary degrees from Western University, the University of Ontario Institute of Technology, and Wilfrid Laurier University. In 2018, he was made an officer of the Order of Canada for his lifetime of public service and for his devotion to the development of our nation. Now, I count Perrin as a friend and a trusted and highly valued ally, not only for the Edmonton Chamber of Commerce, but for the entire Canadian business community. Perrin, I'm delighted to welcome you today, and the floor is yours.
Janet, thank you very much. Thank you for the very kind introduction. I must say, I watched Robin's Treasurer's Report with considerable jealousy. You realize that your fiscal position is billions of dollars better than the government of Canada's. They're apt to be coming to you to ask you to float a loan to assist them now. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you. It's a pleasure to be able to do so. And let me say, first of all, how much I appreciate the extraordinary work that you and all of the team, Janet, at the Edmonton Chamber are doing throughout the crisis. And let me thank you for the opportunity to join your virtual AGM today. Like you, I greatly wish that we could have met in person, but it's definitely not business as usual for any of us. It's really hard to believe that it was just 2 months ago that we were focused on the impact of the rail blockades and gearing up for the federal budget. Today, these issues, so important then, seem trivial. There's no playbook or roadmap for where we are today. What we're seeing, however, is a strong desire to come together to work on our challenges. Neighbors getting groceries for friends in isolation, communities celebrating birthdays with socially distanced parties, and consider the exceptional leadership from industry in retooling to produce the much needed personal protective equipment. The Easter we just had was unlike any we've ever experienced before. It was hard for us to reconcile the stories we were hearing from across Canada and around the world with our understanding of Easter as a time of life and of renewal. But beyond our feelings of isolation and of loss, there's something else. We're being reminded that the most important things in our lives are those that we often take for granted: our family and friends, our health, our food and shelter, and the promise that however bleak the weather may seem today, spring will inevitably come. Now, closer to home for the Chamber family, two trends of coming together have really resonated for me in the past few weeks. First, the business community is united in a way that I've never seen before. In addition to the network of 450 chambers of commerce and boards of trade across Canada, we've been working very closely with over 100 of Canada's leading business and industry associations, including the Business Council of Canada, the Canadian Council of Aboriginal Business, the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters, and the Retail Council of Canada. The Canadian Chamber of Commerce has been using our power to convene to lead the business community's response to COVID-19. We continue to work closely with the federal government and sharing what we hear from our members as the government plans its response. Now, I know that chambers across the country are hurting because their members are hurting. Businesses along the main streets of Canada have gone dark, and far too many of them will not light up again. This issue is particularly acute in Alberta, where the problem is compounded by the collapse in energy prices. And if I can be permitted a personal observation, it's an extraordinary comment on the character of Albertans that despite all of the strains between Alberta and other parts of Canada in recent years, Premier Kenney announced last week that the province was sending essential medical supplies to people who desperately need them in the rest of the country. This act of good citizenship should not be forgotten when the rest of the country considers Alberta's specific needs. Now, let's turn for a moment to the role that chambers of commerce and boards of trade are playing during the crisis. We all know that Canada's businesses need their chambers during good times. However, chambers become a lifeline when times get hard. That's when we demonstrate our worth. At the Canadian Chamber, we're meeting daily with senior officials. They're not only listening, but they're acting on our advice. We saw this with the wage subsidy issue when it moved from initially 10% to 75%. The wage subsidy is the most important federal support program designed to help businesses weather the storm. Like other programs, it's been revised several times to better respond to the need. Now, that shouldn't be a surprise to us. Programs that would ordinarily take weeks or months to design and to implement are now being put together in days. This crisis forces all of us to build the plane while we're flying on it. The message that we're giving to government is that while more fine-tuning is needed to ensure the that the businesses for which these programs are designed are included. The key priority at this point is execution. We need to get the money into the hands of businesses as soon as possible. Hundreds of thousands of businesses must cover their expenses, but they have no revenue coming in. Simply put, financial assistance that comes too late will be of no benefit at all. There will be no jobs for the people to go back to once the pandemic subsides, and no tax revenues for governments. And the dreams of tens of thousands of entrepreneurs who've invested their visions, their savings, and their lives in building their businesses will be lost. Now, we've been promised that sector-specific support is also coming. Once again, it needs to be provided now. Our members in affected industries like transportation and energy urgently need to protect hundreds of thousands of jobs across their respective supply chains. We're grateful that the federal government has worked closely with the Canadian Chamber of Commerce as Ottawa developed its economic support programs for businesses and for workers. But the Chamber's role goes further. In early April, we worked with the Government of Canada to launch the Canadian Business Resiliency Network. The CBRN includes a standalone hub for credible and authoritative information, the latest news and insights, tools and resources as a platform for engaging businesses. I'd like to invite each of you to use this resource, which is located at cbrn.ca. It offers information sharing and awareness building initiatives, including newsletters and webinars on programs and best practices. It provides analysis and reporting on business, industry, and economic trends across the country, including looking at what's working and where gaps exist. And when you visit the site, you'll find tools and supports to help your business with its continuity planning from development to implementation. Now, CBRN has an essential role to play in ensuring consistent and accurate, up-to-date, authoritative information for both the public and the private sector. Let me mention one example in particular. Over the last several weeks, we worked with Statistics Canada to develop the Canadian Survey of Business Conditions. The survey is designed to capture time-sensitive data about what businesses are going through and how they're planning for the eventual recovery. It examines issues like the impact that COVID-19 has had on businesses, changes that businesses have made to adapt to the ongoing situation, the challenges they continue to face, and the new ones they expect as the recovery begins. Credible, reliable data is the foundation for sound decision-making by business leaders, market analysts, and policymakers alike. During a crisis like COVID-19, relevant and timely data is critical. We need to make sure that policymakers at all levels of government have a full view of the obstacles that businesses have to overcome. We want to make sure that the information is clear and precise so policymakers can focus on the biggest issues and direct their support to what matters most. If you haven't done so already, please go to the CBRN website and complete the survey. The 20 minutes that you take will greatly assist businesses in your region. The deadline for this survey is Friday, April 17th, and we should have the data shortly afterward. And we'll share it without cost with anyone who'd like to have access to it. Now, Janet, I'd like to also touch briefly on what we're doing to support chambers. First, we're convening weekly update calls with the Chamber Network and with sectoral associations that features private sector and government guests who answer questions that chambers and their members may have. Next, we're partnering with businesses and government to provide technical briefing webinars on COVID-19 programs and response measures. Additionally, we're working individually and through committees with our national working groups to respond to specific circumstances that businesses and chambers find themselves in. The bottom line is that we're here to help. We will be here with you throughout the crisis and beyond. It's important that Canadians understand both the serious issues that businesses must resolve and the business community's critical role in helping our country through the crisis. The Edmonton Chamber can help us provide that information. We need you to share stories of members doing great things in their community, including companies that are retooling to help in the fight. We need to hear about the innovative ways in which members have continued operations and have supported their employees and their customers. We need to hear about the new pain points or gaps in programs so we can advise the government. And we invite you to share any survey results of your members that will help us to present to government a clear picture of how Edmonton's businesses are affected and how they're responding. Finally, I know that when you have a fire in the living room, it's hard to think about whether the roof requires repairs. However, in this instance, we have no choice but to start thinking now about how we'll know when it's time to restart the economy and how best to do it without provoking a second outbreak of the disease. If businesses and sectors have a strategy to minimize the health risk, it will allow us to turn the engine back on earlier. Now, we've all seen the Hollywood movies where the alien invader is beaten at the last minute by acts of extraordinary heroism, and you watch the world's population emerge from hiding into the bright sunshine. Unfortunately, this isn't a Hollywood movie. Until a vaccine is developed, perhaps as long as 2 years from now, we'll be living with the disease in our midst. That means that instead of restarting our economy and our society all at once, it will be tentatively, sector by sector, region by region, or even age group by age group. We may even be forced to pull back on occasion if the disease reasserts itself. We also need to understand that the world in which we will find ourselves is very different from the one in which we lived only a few weeks ago. Some of the ways in which we'll be different are already apparent. For example, well, the lesson learned from fighting a global pandemic should have been that we best succeed in fighting a global problem through a global response. We've instead seen over 75 countries engage in pandemic protectionism by limiting the export of essential medical supplies. These export controls, coupled with the impacts on global supply chains of industrial shutdowns in other countries, particularly in Asia, will cause countries to focus more on self-sufficiency, as opposed to counting on having ready access to products produced on the other side of the world, or in the case of Canada, even on the other side of our southern border. The world will also be more digitized. As organizations were forced to become virtual, many discovered a new business model that they'll want to preserve. And individual Canadians who become accustomed to clicking and buying, as opposed to making a special trip to the supermarket or to the grocery store, may not want to go back to the old ways of doing things. Every organization, public or private, needs to re-examine its business model. That includes the Canadian Chamber, which will be much more digitized in the future. There's no reason once the pandemic is over why we can't use the technology that we're using today to be more accessible for you in Edmonton in the future. Now, if any of us could have avoided the experience of the last 6 weeks, we would gladly have done so. However, our goal, whether for business or for government, should be not to return to the past. Yes, 2% growth looks very good compared to what's ahead for the foreseeable future. But our goal should never have been to do marginally better this year than last. And yes, Canadians enjoyed a standard of living that most of the world envied, but our competitiveness was slipping. Our focus should not be on where we were in the past, but on where we need to be in the future. That means that governments must concentrate on the fundamental building blocks on which we can construct an economy that's more resilient, more competitive, and more prosperous than ever before. As we're being taught, in this life there are no guarantees. No one can promise us that we'll achieve these ambitious goals. What we do know, however, is that the best hope for a better future is to start building one. And that planning has to start now. Thanks so much for having me, and I'd be delighted to answer your questions.
Well, thank you so much, Perrin. As Perrin has said, he'd open the floor for questions. Do we have any? Use the Q&A feature, I'll remind you.
No questions noted yet. We'll just give it a few more moments.
Let me make another pitch just while we're waiting, Janet, for CBR, for the website. The resources that are there are designed to be a critical mass of information for Canadian business, and it's being fed in from across the country. So we have programs at all levels of government, we have best practices, we have videos, we have webinars, and a whole range of other resources. And the information that will come in from the Edmonton Chamber will be critical for us in terms of making that richer and ensuring that members across the country aren't each reinventing the wheel, that we can learn from what you're doing in Edmonton and be able to build on that. So your engagement in that will be very, very helpful to us as well. And if people have suggestions for ways we can improve it, we'd welcome that.
Well, thank you. I can tell you that we've taken many steps, Per, and I will be speaking about a few coming up, but sharing with you is something we'd be most happy to do. And we'll do as much of that as we possibly can, as you say, in order to gain all of that insight back.
Well, as an example, one of the first things we did was to look at continuity planning for businesses. And you'll recall the floods in Calgary a few years ago. As a result of that, the Calgary Chamber created a business continuity plan for businesses. This was very, very useful because while it was designed as a result of the flood, the lessons learned from that could be applied in other areas. And they shared that plan with us, which is up on the website. Other chambers have done the same thing. And we've also pulled resources from other areas. So by pooling those resources, by working together, we can build a trove of information, which is really valuable to Canadian business and to Canadian governments as well.
Absolutely, and we would love to be part of that. And I think you'll find a lot of the information that we've been gathering will really be important to the entire picture as you're pulling it together.
Another thing, Janet, will be putting up. We've also started a series of where I have a conversation with leaders of one sort or another about issues related to COVID-19. The one that's currently up there, we call it the business of business. The one that's currently up there is with Mary Ng, who's the Minister for Small Business, and she talks about some of the programs the government has developed. The one we'll be posting this week is a conversation that I've had with Rick Hansen, Canada's Man in Motion. And Rick talks about the challenges of isolation for persons working with disabilities. But what you'll find inspirational from it is when he talks about overcoming adversity. It's extraordinary. We heard about that at our AGM, you'll recall, a few years ago in Fredericton. Yeah. And this is somebody who faced such incredible adversity, taking himself, becoming a paraplegic at 15. Taking himself around a wheelchair in those adverse of circumstances when he was 27 and 28, facing just incredible challenges from weather and from other circumstances, bringing himself across Canada and then being able to contribute tens of millions of dollars to research and to act as a champion for the disabled. You'll find his answers simply inspirational. And each week we'll be adding more of these conversations with Canadians.
We'll be sure to be putting those out to all of our members. And I can tell you, I've had a couple of occasions to be with Mr. Hansen and interact with him. And he is truly inspirational and truly grounds you and makes you really realize what's important and what you're doing. You know, I'm just going to say from my view to the moderator and the host, I can't see any chat in our chat room at all. I'm just wondering if that's functioning.
It is, and actually, sorry to interrupt, it's Lisa, the moderator. We do have a few questions, Perrin, if you had a few minutes to stay with us.
You bet.
All right, our first question is from Ian O'Donnell, who's with the Downtown Business Association here in Edmonton. His question, how do you see the role of chambers and businesses improvement areas change or be fortified as we look to recovery?
More important than ever before. The businesses along every main street in Canada are being battered at the present time. And a critical role that chambers of commerce and that business improvement associations play is to support those businesses. We are pressing very hard at the present time with help from Janet and from others to stress to the federal government that assistance that arrives too late is of no value at all if the business is being permanently closed. And the businesses up and down the streets of Edmonton throughout the country are right now facing situations where they're required to be closed, where they have ongoing responsibilities to pay for stock, to pay for rent, to pay for employees and for other charges that they have, but they have no income to pay for that. And what we've been saying to the government is they can't afford to wait another 3 or 4 weeks. They need the assistance now. We would like to see the government rebate the GST that businesses have paid as a down payment, if you like, to begin to assist businesses to get money in their hands now. But the government needs to move ahead on that. As we move beyond the lockdown into recovery, we're going to have to work very closely with those businesses to make sure that we're meeting their needs. And we should be looking at programs from government to assist them, because the health of our downtown cores is so critical and our cores in the various communities in our larger cities is absolutely critical to the life of the community itself. So at the Canadian Chamber, we're delighted to work with you, and your role is going to be more important than it's ever been. The next question from Jeffrey, I see, is about protectionist policies around the world. Yes, I'm very concerned about that. What we've seen from the United States under President Trump is a series of protectionist measures, including ones directed against Canada. We saw that against our steel sector, steel and aluminum. We saw it against our pulp and paper sector and lumber. We saw it against our automotive sector. And we saw protectionist measures from him when he said that when he forced 3M initially to hold back on shipments of N95 respirators to Canada. And what he's doing is replicating and encouraging measures that are being put in place in other countries around the world as well. So I expect to see at the very time that globalization should be something that's more important to us than ever before. I see growing pressures around the world from people turning inward, building walls, and making it more difficult for global supply chains to function. So as I look at this, Jeffrey, there are a couple of points for us. We need to continue to be resolutely internationalist in Canada. We need to continue to promote the World Trade Organization and to promote global cooperation, particularly for dealing with issues like pandemics and with a whole range of other issues that are global in nature. But we also then need to look to our strategies domestically. We are building in Canada a domestic Canadian public health industrial base, much the way when I was defense minister, we focused on the Canadian defense industrial base to ensure that in time of crisis that we'd have the resources that were necessary, the industry that was necessary to be able to support our needs. We've built that in Canada. I don't think we can afford to allow ourselves to be in the position again in the future where for these basic needs we become dependent on others. Once having created these industries, we need to preserve them here. We need to look at our food supply to make sure that we are increasingly self-reliant in Canada in terms of our supply of food. Energy. We're blessed in Canada by our resources. It is crazy that if we are not looking in Canada at supplying all Canadians, all Canadian energy. And that's a matter of national security now, as opposed to simply a matter of economics. So in a range of areas, yes, I expect to see the world become more fragmented. Canada should continue to promote knocking down barriers, but we also should be looking at ensuring that we become more self-sufficient ourselves in Canada. How do I see foreign investment in Canada for 2021? I see particular opportunities for foreign investment, particularly in the sectors I was just talking about. If we identify areas where we need to be more self-sufficient, the fact that it's foreign investment, the fact that it may be a foreign company coming into Canada to establish a facility in Canada shouldn't be of concern to us, as long as we are able to get our hands on the products that we need to guarantee that those products will be available. The challenge will be obviously in attracting investment that as we come out of the recession, it's going to be a long, slow process. I don't anticipate that we're going to be seeing what some people refer to as a V-shaped recession where you slingshot back out of it. Instead, because so much damage is being done to the economic infrastructure of the country, and because we'll be having a release of the lockdown that will take place on a graduated basis, the recovery will be much slower. And indeed, OECD, I believe, released a report just this afternoon that was looking at the economic projections for the rest of this year, indicating that for most of this year, advanced countries are going to see a decline in their GDP of about 6%, with a rebound next year, but not back to where we were at the beginning of this year. So we need to work very hard to attract that investment. Governments need to focus on the fundamentals. And what is absolutely critical here is that government not focus on what would be nice to have, but on what we need to have as Canadians, and that is investment and growth in our economy and creation of new jobs. Let me move to Andre's question. The crisis has driven all of us to a more collaborative and cooperative model of behavior. I think there's an opportunity to rebuild a more resilient, prosperous economy based on that new behavior. Any thoughts on tools and processes that will help us to head in that direction? Digitization helps us to do that. I think one of the things that we found with these new technologies is that it's much easier to collaborate across traditional boundaries. So the use of video conferencing, the use of telecommunications more broadly will allow us to do things we couldn't have done before. I can think certainly of universities, of researchers who will be working more closely together. And I can think of businesses who can be doing that as well. In addition to that, I think there's a spirit that's being created that is causing us to look beyond traditional competitiveness. For example, I mentioned to you that we formed a partnership with other organizations that often would be looked at as competitors of ours. The Business Council of Canada, CFIB, Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters. And we realized that our members are often members of each of these organizations. And what they're looking for is for us in business to instead of fighting with each other, to look at ways to collaborate with each other. So there's a business imperative to us often to reach out and to work with others. I'll give you another example. We've been working very closely during this with our counterparts, the Canadian Labour Congress, and with Hassan Youssef, who's my counterpart there. Hassan and I have known each other for some time. We have a good relationship with each other. But in this crisis, it's become even more important for business and labor to work more collaboratively. I would see us doing more of that across the traditional boundaries as well. There's a great opportunity for us to do that. How will exports be affected after the COVID outbreak is under control? I am obviously concerned about that. The government is as well at the federal level. The Canadian Trade Commissioner Service is operating throughout all of this and is trying to be there to assist Canadian businesses looking to export. The most important export I want to see us focusing on is building the pipeline and getting access to tidewater for our energy resources. And we need to make sure that with all of our resources that we recognize the fact that we have the capacity to serve not just Canada and the world, and that we have not only the right to do so, but an obligation to share our resources to others and to bring them to bear to solve global problems. I am very worried, as I mentioned earlier, that we'll see countries turning inward on themselves, building walls, seeing the rest of the world as a threat as opposed to an opportunity. I believe that Canada's response should be just the opposite, and that we should be working together to take down walls, that we should see the world as our customer and as our supplier, and that we should be looking for ways to collaborate on great international issues across global boundaries. So Janet, this is, let me leave you with where I left my comments earlier. Our goal shouldn't go back to go back to where we were. Our goal should be to look forward, to understand how the world has changed, and to set goals for ourselves about where we want to be and how we can be better than we were. That won't happen overnight. It's going to be a long and painful process, and there are going to be setbacks. And I think of John Kennedy's commitment when he made the commitment to take the United States to the moon in 10 years. At that point, the Russians were leading, and the United States was lagging terribly. And when Kennedy made the commitment, he didn't know that it would be possible to actually land a human being on the moon and bring him back within 10 years. The only thing that he knew for sure was if he didn't make the commitment, it wouldn't happen. The same applies for us now. We need to commit ourselves to becoming the country that we want to be and building the economy that we want to build to ensure greater opportunity for ourselves and for our children. And we can do that, and we need to start planning for that, even as we're managing this terrible crisis today.
Well, thank you, Perrin. And unfortunately, we can't all clap for you, but I must tell you that your insights, your perspectives, your advice are invaluable, as I always know they are, and highly valued. We are a very fortunate partner of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, and you finding the time today to come out and do this. I know that you must have many demands on your time. So thank you so much for joining us today.
I'm delighted to do it, Janet. I'm going to leave you now because I have only one demand of my time, and that is I'm the family cook. I'm not good, but I'm cheap, and I had better go and cook my wife some dinner now. So thank you for having me. And I'm looking forward to having a chance to get together with you in person very, very soon.
That would be great. Thanks so much, Perrin.
All the best to all of you.
Bye-bye. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you know, as you've heard from Perrin, and we all know, and we're living it deeply, COVID is creating unprecedented challenges for our job creators, and we're talking to you constantly right now, and we're hearing of your fears and your pain, you're sharing with us, and we so much appreciate that. We've reached out personally by phone to all of our members. We've been gratified that almost 1,000 of you have now completed our online surveys, and you've told us that, you know, after weeks of losing most, if not all, of your revenue streams, there's this very short window of time now for government programs to actually be of value to you. You've said, you know, you recognize governments are they're stepping up to take help and provide help, but their supports are rolling in much too slowly. I wanted to share with you our most recent survey work. Now, just let me do an aside here. I know there's a lot of surveys right now. I know you're inundated with requests to participate in things, but I can tell you that we're rolling out our surveys every 2 weeks, and now we can actually monitor and mark and benchmark what our progress is within our own local community. 55% of you have laid off staff now, and only about 10% of you don't expect to be doing that. 29% of you now are saying you don't even have enough cash on hand to meet your next payroll period. And nearly 60% of you think that you may have to go out of business entirely before this is over. These are shocking, shocking statistics, especially because we know these are early days. But we hear you, and we want to champion your concerns and our collective concerns. We want to have government understand that you need financial relief, but you need it immediately. We heard parents say that the whole country needs that. So we've ramped up our communication efforts. I know you're seeing us on Facebook and Twitter and through the news, the media, where we really believe that these strong communications and regular interactions with decision makers are absolutely vital to achieving results on behalf of each of you. You know, we've created our COVID-19 preparedness section on our website. We're providing up-to-date information. We'll continue to do that. This webpage grows daily, but send us information if you have it. We're organizing it so it's easy for you to get that information quickly in bite-sized pieces efficiently so that you can keep going about the business of your days. We've established that COVID-19 support network. If you don't know about it, it's a webpage that matches those in needs of supplies to individuals and organizations that can support them in some way. And, you know, most importantly, if you can't find what you need, reach out to any of us on the Chamber team, because we need to hear from you. We're your advocate. We aim to be your trusted resource. And I know that together with all of our partners and, you know, in the Canadian Chamber, with all of our chamber networks, with all of our business networks, I know that we can provide the tools and the information you need. And I mean, you know, with so much uncertainty, I know it's very, very difficult to remain optimistic. It's darn tough. But what gives me hope is the determination and the incredible generosity of our business community. You know, when I look around, I see business owners who are doing everything they can to support their employees and keep the public safe, even as we know when it's coming at great personal cost. Businesses are leading by example. They're sharing best practices so that others have a leg up and don't have to learn it from the ground floor. I see businesses harnessing all of their entrepreneurial skills and pivoting to meet demand, positively pivoting. I see people helping others. We're all seeing it. They're delivering food and supplies and care, and they're making calls, they're offering support. Right now, we know every little bit helps, and each of you are making a huge contribution by what you can contribute into this pool of help and resources. When we look back on this time, and we'll need to ensure that we're proud of what we did to lift others and to lift our community, to ensure that we demonstrated the kind of leadership that's going to help us emerge even stronger than before. So before we close, I'd really like to again thank our board and our mighty chamber team who have made this virtual AGM a reality. We simply couldn't do this without our chamber village. Most importantly, I want to thank each of you for your gift of your time and your engagement. And ladies and gentlemen, this concludes our 2020 annual general meeting of the Edmonton Chamber of Commerce. I thank you so much, and I wish you great health and brighter days ahead. Thank you.